Okay, Major General Munir Zaman, please, you have the floor.
What is terrorism?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. My question is to the last speaker on urbanization. We all know that over 40% of the global population today lives within 100 kilometers of the coast. And some of our megacities and large financial centers are all coastal cities. Shanghai, Mumbai, New York, and you can count many more. So with sea level rising and the population getting displaced, what sort of mega disruptions and mega shocks are likely to come to these mega cities, which might impact on the continuity of governance, not only of the national system, but also of the international systems? Thank you.
Hello? Yep. Great question in terms of sort of large coastal cities. I think the future will be to change the model in terms of resilience to these kinds of threats. If we look at places like Sweden, and it was on one of my slides as well, a proactive rather than a reactive approach to threats and crises, where resilience is built into the day-to-day processes rather than reactive to emergency responses. So the data's out there, as you say, in terms of rising sea levels. These are threats that are real, and you can see the data online for it. It's something that's going to happen, and I think it can affect the international financial system as well as displacement and some of the issues the other speakers spoke about in terms of migration when cities are hit, which then filters over to other cities. So it's a global problem.
Thank you very much. Are there further questions or even observations, if they are brief ones? General Adizon, Nigeria. Your microphone. Yeah.
Thank you very much. My question is to the last presenter. We have all observed that both present and future problem of security is displacement will be right at the urban centers. As one of the way forward, will it be right to suggest that governments should also look at ways of developing rural areas to also reduce the level of migration to urban centers? Thank you.
That's a very interesting question. In terms of how far urbanisation can go. I think sort of incentivizing people to stay in rural areas is a good thing if you can pay the money that urban centres perhaps offer. But it's not just the money, it's the schools, the networks you get from cities. I'm not sure how you can disincentivize that, especially from young people who are seeking different opportunities. However, in the future, with technological advancements, it may be that cities themselves aren't as important with sort of virtual reality or wherever. You know, having a central space may not be. But urbanisation as a trend just seems to be increasing. If we look at states that have sort of 80%, 90%, or sort of Singapore, Kuwait, places like that upwards. So it doesn't seem to be a stop in terms of the movement towards cities at the moment.
Thank you. Madam Soda, you would like to say?
Yes, perhaps in relation to displacement, and indeed a very good question, General. What we found in our research is that people who move from rural areas to cities often come with a very particular skill set and are in fact unable to find work in cities because they've lived in rural areas all their lives. And so I think it's a question perhaps more for development organizations also, but it goes hand in hand to look at education and what kind of skills are needed. But it's a very good question that at times people from rural areas, they find it attractive to come to urban areas, but in fact become destitute because they cannot make a living. So I think it's a question of cooperating together.
Thank you very much. Would you like? No. General Singh of India.
Can you hear me? Well, I have a question, in fact, observations for the two ladies onto the left of the chair. That's Dr. Caroline Halliday and the other one to Miss Eva Swoboda. The one on the Homeland Security is about the fact that you did make a mention about human beings, and I fully understand and I endorse your views. It's the human beings that matter when you talk in terms of Homeland Security. But then, more importantly, it is not the physical, presence of the people and taking care of them. The most two important components of the people, which got to be looked after by the state to integrate the community, are the hearts and minds. And what I wish to highlight is the President Trump's certain executive orders, which he signed when he came in, certain statements that he's made, which tend to create fissures in the United States fabric, if you really come to think of it. And there are a large number of today, given the social media, we have large number of, these incidents being reported, and you get to see what's happening. For that matter, even my community has been targeted in the United States. So what I'm coming to is that when you talk in terms of Homeland Security, I think what you should be looking at also is the fact of integrating societies, integrating communities into one homogeneous whole. And that calls for, I would say, it starts from top. And perhaps the strategy to be adopted is that you've got to be far more sensitive to the aspirations of various communities, their religious sensitivities. And I think we cannot afford to, paint certain communities with a broad brush. It's been done, like 7 states for that matter, Muslim predominant states have been banned. The people coming into the United States as per the executive order by President Trump when he came in. So that was one aspect, and I think we need to be looking at that, which is more important because we all are involved. We all have heterogeneous societies, and we've been involved in the Homeland Security ourselves. The second aspect is with regard to the second lady, ma'am. This is about my personal experience of IDPs in the United Nations. I was in Congo, the divisional commander of the multinational division. And it was my experience that, and I'm sorry to say because I know there'll be a large number of people who participated in that mission, but as a divisional commander and a deputy force commander, the impression that I gathered based on very concrete inputs was that most of these IDPs were based on rumors being spread by people. And I kept telling the United Nations people, the OCHA, the UNHCR, the other agencies that are dealing with it, that for heaven's sake, why don't you give radios to the people and tell them what is what? My submission to you would be that perhaps United Nations need to look at public information mechanisms for various missions to arrest IDPs, because most of them start moving based on rumors, and these rumors have got to be dispelled. So if that happens, I think things will fall in place. And the other thing, I'm sorry to say again, perhaps it may not be, maybe in a way, hitting below the belt to some of the people, but my experience was that it's an industry, United Nations. So I've done 3 UN missions, mind you, and nobody ever wants a mission to close down because there are locals who are employed in it. And IDPs move also on account of the fact that locals are involved because it is their livelihood. When is the UN going to look into these aspects, which actually is a drain on I would say, the international, taxpayer? We all are paying, we are all contributing, all nations are contributing to the purse of the United Nations. So I think these issues need to be looked into, which are more practical, based on hands-on experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone wants to comment? No?
Yes.
Madam Swoboda? Yeah.
Thank you, General Singh. I've also worked in the DRC, so thank you very much for your comment. I cannot comment on the United Nations as I work for the ICRC, but I think you're very right that communication is critical. And we need to understand why people flee. Sometimes it's the perception of a threat. Sometimes it is the real threat, but it's true that communication also to let people know what kind of assistance they might be able to receive. Again, what we found in our research is that sometimes people come to cities in the hope of receiving assistance, but in fact they don't. And it's not clear why they don't receive any assistance. And again, I think it's up to us humanitarian organizations also to understand what people need. In the past, we've perhaps quite often thought that we knew what they wanted and gave a blanket response. But I think it's again that communication. But I take your point that it needs to be better, more effectively done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, General Singh. I think I fully sympathize with you, having worked at the UN. We have seen so many occasions where peacekeepers get into trouble because there is no peace to keep. So, a very cogent observation. I have the last speaker, Mr. Munir from Bangladesh. If there are any other speakers, please signify now. If not, after this, we will adjourn for your belated lunch. Mr. Munir, Bangladesh.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. My question is, again, for the last speaker, Dr. Twort. I think you made an interesting point about our cities increasingly getting militarized. But considering that in many of the developing countries, given the challenges faced by those countries, it is the militaries which ultimately are the provider or the organization that governments look up to when natural disasters hit or other urban threat multipliers come into action. So do you potentially envisage a bigger role for militaries as urban security becomes more complex? Or and therefore are we going to see cities getting more militarized? And another question to our speaker from the esteemed speaker from the ICRC. As sea level rises, we are probably going to see more internal displacement. And I think some of the statistics from various countries, including Bangladesh, point to the fact that the number of IDPs will dramatically increase as the water level rises due to climate change. So are our international organizations adequately prepared to deal with some of the crises that are about to afflict us, or is it too late for planning already? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would you?
Yes, great questions. I think it sort of hints at what I was saying as well, with the move from military security to human security as well. In the UK, we've seen a merging of the national security threat along with the strategic defence review within one document. So you can kind of see the merge in there. In terms of the role of the military, it really differs in terms of the context. So I spent a lot of time in Sierra Leone, where the military were considered in higher regard than the police, because the police was the face of corruption and bribery as far as the everyday was concerned, and the military actually had been reformed to a large extent. So I think it definitely depends on the perceptions within the community towards the military, and I think that can be handled and managed. I do see the military, especially in the UK, taking on more domestic matters in terms of natural disasters or flooding, where the capacity of the police is stretched, so the military will be called in, I think especially in the Olympics, these kind of big events with the terrorist threats. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just rethinking the role of the military in different contexts and how it can help. But we've also seen within the UK, on television adverts and on the underground in the tube, civilians being used as soft tools to help. So you'll have slogans like "see it, say it, sort it." So using people as the eyes of the authorities or the police if they see something suspicious, and that can be used as well.
Thank you very much. That concludes our session. I dare not take the risk of trying to sum up before a hungry audience. So I simply want to thank our three distinguished panelists and a very active audience. Thank you. Have a good lunch.